Welcome to the show that doesn't have a name. We couldn't be able to come up with a name, so we're just going to call it the show without a name.
And in this show that has no name, we'll be talking about famous stop motion animation films.
Yes.
Which you might have not known or realised that were stop motion.
Or if they actually have a lot behind them, so it's not just the fact they're stop motion, there's also a lot of tricks
A
that
lot of
they use
history.
to make them extremely effective and part of cinema history.
So the first film that we've got here is King Kong, 1933.
Also one of the first films to introduce stop motion.
So it was directed by Willis O'Brien. Willis O'Brien had previously experimented with special effects using figurines in short trick films and in the 1910s. And he created the special effects in the first feature-length film to exploit the animation technique, which is the famously known The Lost World film in 1925, in which held a stop-motion Predacon, Allosaur, different dinosaurs, dinosaur names, different dinosaurs, Brontosaur, Allosaur, Predacon, who rampage through London, destroying the Tower Bridge. Yes. He then later perfected this technique in King Kong.
King Kong was stop frame, right?
Yes.
As we was talking on
Some
Definition
parts.
Busters the other week, we was talking
also
about
have a
all the different
show.
techniques. So obviously King Kong, it's evolved into something from the animal locomotion.
Yes.
So when
yes.
they took loads of pictures of the animals and they got the horse in motion, this is similar except in the
But
form
with
of
actual
cinema.
models.
And actual models, yeah. So it's easier to create. So you can't exactly train a monkey to blow up everything.
So King Kong was created, constructed by Marcel Delgado from the designs and directions of Cooper and O'Brien on a 1 inch equal 1 foot scale to simulate a gorilla 18 feet tall.
So basically they used special camera angles, and then you're saying that it was just a tiny model, but it was made to look big.
They were actually 18 inches. So every inch, so however feet tall the gorilla looked in the film were actually inches. How big he is in inches in actual real life.
Right. So didn't you say they had different size gorillas?
Yes.
So why was that?
That's where I'm coming up to now.
Okay.
So the 4 models were built. Yes, and there was one which was it was 2 of them, 2 jointed 18-inch aluminium, which was made from aluminium, foam rubber, latex, and rabbit fur. Yes, model. And there was another one that was just one big model, which was 24 inches and created from the same materials. For the New York scenes, when he's falling down the Empire State Building, very sad bit. It's really sad. So it's only just a tiny little figurine. It don't know how actual big it was.
Because it's quite a long shot, there was no need to use a big scale model, was it? And when you watch the footage, it's just tiny.
King Kong's torso was actually streamlined, so to get rid of the comical appearance that the real world gorillas have from their bellies and their bums. So it was actually just straight, so they weren't tubby and didn't have big asses.
Oh.
Yeah. So his lips and eyebrows and nose were made of rubber. His eyes were made of glass, and his facial expressions were controlled by thin bendable wires that were drilled in through his aluminium skull. But during the filming, King Kong's rubber skin sadly would dry up under the filming lights, the studio lights. So they would have to keep on rebuilding his face and rebuilding the wires and everything to get the facial expression, which played continuously looks like fluid motion.
What sort of, if you watch the movie now, does it feel old? Like, does it look?
It looks ancient.
Yeah, but is
No.
it still enjoyable to watch?
But it is. It's got that old magical feel to it. You know, when he's just moving around.
Yeah, and even though it looks old, they paid attention to, was it Thomas Edison's theory about the frame rate? They're saying that 24 frame rate frames per second is the absolute least for a stop motion. Otherwise, it would look obvious that there's black separating the scenes. So obviously, it still looks alright today, because even stop motion today, like Nightmare Before Christmas and things like that, it's still pretty much the same frame rate. So even though it looks ancient, it's still quite modern at the same time.
It's still built on the same principle.
Pretty much, yeah. So they haven't really changed much in terms of frame rate. It's just, it looks better. Probably made easier.
But yeah, you can still watch it.
No, I think King Kong
it's still
cool.
a classic.
It is a classic film, and just like, it's clever how they can capture emotions through a model and make, all the soundtracks. The soundtrack worked really well with the film. I think that the gorilla was quite well made, to be honest.
Yes, yeah, well.
To become an icon in film history. Okay, Nightmare Before Christmas. This is a slightly different stop motion animation to King Kong. Considering there's no human presence in the film at all. It's just all claymation, all dolls and stuff like that.
Yeah, but it doesn't. I thought it was created by a computer.
No, yeah, it looks, because the film. Well, I'll get down to the details later, but the film took a very long time, well over 3 years to make. More than that, 6 years.
I thought it was 3 years just to make the set.
Yeah, it's 3 years just to make the set alone. Okay, so the film took over 100 artists, and these were including technicians, puppeteers, puppet makers, lighting designers, and cameramen, everything you can associate with stop motion, which is a hell of a lot. I mean, 100 artists. I mean, Wallace and Gromit was only like 2 or 3, weren't it? There was only 2 or 3. You see set designs and there's only 3 people around the set, but this took over 100. It's crazy. And first of all, they started off with drawings of their characters, and then they molded their dolls and clay out of what the pictures were, so there's something to work to, so it didn't look like a pile of crap. So as I was saying about the set, 3 years to make it, and because the set was so big, because there was quite a lot of locations in the film, there was well over 20 locations, I reckon.
Wow.
They had to be cut up into different places, because obviously the puppeteers had to move the characters after every photo, and there was also trapdoors added so they could get in through certain places that are hard to get to, like reaching over, so they could change the characters' expressions and movement.
How do they change the characters' expressions?
Well, what they did is, because there were some of them that was quite stiff, so they could just move it, let go, and the next picture, move it slightly. But
what about the facial expressions?
Like facial expressions, well, with the main character, Jack, he had 400 different heads, so each one had a slightly different expression on it, so that they didn't have to constantly keep changing the expression, because it was obviously a lot of work to get it, because it was a doll.
They just take off his head.
So in total there was 227 puppets created for the film. So that is a lot. I mean, it's crazy, and you can see why it took so long to make. The main characters were made several times to allow easy interchanging of their bodies. So as I was saying with the heads, they made their bodies a couple of times, so it was easier to make the interchanges.
You mean like when he's dressed up as Father Christmas?
Yeah. So the directors pushed fluid motion. They wanted it to look as realistic as they could. So they made it. They forced the puppeteers to do it tiny amounts, as small as they could, so that when they put it together, it looked exactly like it would in like a film.
God, how just imagine.
It took a lot of patience, and they had to select their puppeteers pretty pretty carefully, because if they found
it looks pretty remarkable.
It is.
I didn't even know it was stop frame.
Yeah, I know. That's why it's so effective, because if you don't know that it's stop motion, that means it is incredibly good. So so the frame rate was 24, which was the same as King Kong, and King Kong was 1933. This was recently. It's been 20 years nearly since it was 1990.
So it's
1993, 1992, something like that. So
Yeah.
yeah, so even though it's very modern, it's still the same frame rate, which doesn't matter because it still looks as good. In King Kong, you didn't really notice the black either, did you? So obviously 24 frames per second, in case you don't know at home, which is 24 photos per second. So each photo they took, so it'd take about 20 minutes to do a second, more than that probably to finalise it. It'd probably take about 3 days to do 1 second.
Yeah.
And the film was 76 minutes, I think, something like that.
Yeah.
So that's a long time. Basically, another thing going back to when they was recording, when they was taking the photos, if they made one mistake, the puppeteers had to redo the entire scene because of continuity.
God.
A grand total of 109,440 photos were taken overall.
Wow.
So you think if it takes, about 2 minutes to do, or probably like 5 to 10 minutes to do one photo, 5 minutes, 5 times 109,000. I'm not even going to try and work that out. With the sets, 230 sets were set up on 19 sound stages. So they only had like 19 stages for recording sound, but they had 230 different sets, so a lot of moving around. To produce effective work, 8 camera crews using computer-controlled cameras, so they was on cranes and they could control them, so they didn't get them. It's easier to control them, and especially with stop motion, you need to keep the camera still, don't you? Otherwise, it sort of takes away the illusion a bit. That's pretty much it for Nightmare Before Christmas.
Well, as I said, the viewers chose the Terminator for us to talk about next. Now, the original Terminator, which was created in 1984. Now, in this film, there are a few scenes where they use stop motion. Now, one of the scenes, for example, is when Arnold is ripping out his eye or something after he's got shot in front of a mirror.
And obviously, the effects at the time couldn't produce something as realistic through computers, so they had to use stop motion.
Yeah, and they created a whole Arnold Schwarzenegger model.
It's a miniature model, so it looked like it was big because of the camera angle, but actually it was about that tall.
Yeah.
About that. And it was pretty accurate. I mean, right now it looks a bit fake.
It does look quite bad if you look at it now,
but you can still notice it is Arnold Schwarzenegger. So.
And it's still a classic film, and you still love it.
Yeah, obviously.
Another scene was when Arnold's just been blown
the
blown
truck
to
explosion
smithereens.
Towards the end.
And
you think he's dead, but then he rises.
But he's not. Yeah, it's just his metal skeleton, where all his skin's melted off, and it's just the roboticness left behind.
Yeah.
And now this was made. Yeah, was modeled.
It was actually a model. So you think it's like computer generated at the time, but no, it wasn't.
It was on a 1 to 3 scale, making him roughly about 24.
About the same as Arnie, about that. About a bit bigger.
24 inches.
Yeah.
24 inches.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There'll be pictures coming up. You'll be able to see.
Yeah. The figure was photographed multiple times to create the illusion of the chasing of it chasing Sarah and Reese.
Well, the stop motion effects was created by a company called Fantasy 2. They was just a company around the time that because Cameron wasn't actually too hip on this film because he had a dream about a cyborg pulling itself across the floor or something, and then he decided to make a script for the Terminator. And while it wasn't a big hit at the time, he had a lot of time to work on it because the cast, Arnold Schwarzenegger and the rest of them were busy, and Arnold was doing Conan the Destroyer at the time, so he had to wait about 9 months for Arnie to join the crew. But so we're talking about him walking out, chasing down the corridor. I mean, it looks like it's a life-size model or CGI, but when you find out that it's a model, you can see it, but it's very well done. It's a low-angled shot, so it makes it look like it's big, but it's actually like
small
miniature model. And also to do the model, they specifically introduced the fact that Arnie sort of done something with his leg, so he was limping, because this was done so that when they created the scene with the corridor chase, it was easier to make the model move, because limping is easier to mimic than walking.
As it's all very
and it looked more, it looked more authentic.
Like that.
Yeah, but the Terminator was also influenced by another stop motion picture, because the film Jason and the Argonauts, which the stop motion was done by it was Ray Harry Houston. James Cameron was influenced by the skeleton battle, and he based the Terminator's skeletal appearance on the skeletons in Jason and the Argonauts. I mean, a lot of directors have been influenced by Ray Harry Houston, we'll get to in a minute, such as Peter Jackson, who was influenced by Sinbad. He used to tape record the film when he went to the cinema and listen to it at night because he loved the film that much.
Wow.
And other directors as well were quite influenced by this guy, but we'll get back to him in a minute. Why do you like Terminator?
Just Arnold does it
Arnold
for me.
Schwarzenegger. He's great in it. It's just his face.
Yeah. Even his animated face, it's just
brilliant.
It's just brilliant.
And the way he speaks, you can't beat it. I mean, who would have thought that Terminator is an Austrian?
Yeah.
Austrian annihilator of humans.
It's just brilliant.
You can't beat the iconic line, "I'll be back."
And yet the modern Terminators are rubbish in comparison.
They
I mean, the first two.
They're too heavily relying on CGI, and you can tell it's more fake than perhaps it was in then. It's just because I reckon early 2000s was the best, because they was sort of like halfway in the past, halfway towards finding all these new effects, and it sort of looked as if you'd see it in life. But now, especially with The Hobbit, I thought it was a brilliant film, but some bits you could tell were so fake. There was just too much green screen in it, and it just got a bit too much at the time. And then you watch the original Lord of the Rings, and it sort of looks more authentic than The Hobbit, and you think that.
Yeah.
A bit of it's a bit fake, doesn't it?
Like the first two Terminators are brilliant classics.
Yeah, Terminator 2 was one of the first films to introduce like a new sort of CGI modelling program. I can't remember what it's called, but it was one of the first to introduce heavy CGI, so they didn't have to rely on stop motion.
Yeah. They were just brilliant. They were marvellous.
Yeah.
Afterwards, it just got a bit repetitive.
Lastly, on today's show of the show without a name,
No Name Show.
Yes, we're going to be talking about
Clash of the Titans.
/ Jason and the Argonauts.
Argonauts.
What does Argonauts mean?
It's the Greek creatures, isn't it?
No.
No? Don't know.
I thought it was his accompaniments. Argonauts apparently are people that follow a leader into a journey, and they're like sea warriors as well.
I don't know.
That's what I don't know. And this is where the man Ray Harry Houston, I think that's how you say his name, comes into play, because he's a very, very big icon in stop motion animation.
Ray Harry Houston. Harry
so.
Houston used the special effects or technique of stop motion animation
Quite a lot, yeah.
To create all of his supernatural beings, creatures,
like everything like Sinbad and
all his monsters were created by this technique.
Yeah. So Ray was also the co-producer of his films. Clash of Titans obviously has a lot of creatures in it, but we thought that the most iconic part of the film was the Medusa battle, which you watch it today, it's even more scary than the remake. I mean, I thought the remake was a pathetic attempt at creating Medusa. Like, Medusa wasn't even scary, it was like some stripper woman who had snakes on their head. I mean, in Greek mythology, Medusa is meant to be ugly, but in the film she was like made to look extremely beautiful, but she wasn't, and it was very weird, and she wasn't even scary, which took away the whole suspense.
She's meant to be beautiful.
She is meant to be beautiful.
Is she?
It was
She
yeah.
has the snakes on her head, the men still want to look at her, because she's beautiful. They look at her, and then they get turned to stone. So she was meant to be beautiful.
So yeah, all of that was stop motion, 24 frames per second also, and that was done, I think it was a bit of claymation as well as puppet modelling as well. The claymation was for snakes in their hair, because obviously the wiggle effect would be pretty hard with just a doll, because it'd be hard to stick it in one place. But if they use clay, then it'd be easy to mould it into place. But obviously took a
Her
long
whole body
time.
was, or what was her body?
I think
It looked.
yeah, it's because you can tell it's claymation instead of like stop motion, because you can sort of see like the ripples on the body. Like it's just like a little line where people have pressure on it. And so you got to pay attention to the clip to see that for yourself.
She used to give me nightmares.
Ray boy.
Ray also did the effects for Jason and the Argonauts.
Yeah.
And Sinbad, the Seventh Voyage, and also used these techniques in these films, in these classicals. Now the Talos in Clash of the in Talos. Now Talos in Thingy and the Argonauts, Jason and the Argonauts, was also created by clay. Talos from Jason and the Argonauts was also created from clay, just clay, nothing else but clay. And that was it. That's all I've got to say about him. Yeah, and so they would just move. Parts of him would fall off because he's just made of clay in the film, and everyone would get so annoyed and be like, "Oh, put Talos' arm back on, will you?" Or, because it would just from the heat of the camera lights, it would just sort of. He also would start to melt.
That's why he looks a bit weird, isn't
Yeah.
it? The last bit in Clash of the Titans with the giant sea monster, that was similar to Terminator. They just filmed it. It was a small model, but it just made it look big.
Made out of clay.
Made out of clay. I think the water was clay also.
Yeah, the boats as well. In fact, the whole set. I think the whole set and their clothes
Even the people were made of clay.
were just
sky,
clay.
the sun,
Everything was just clay. Thank you. Goodbye. Tune in next
Tune
time
in next time for
the show that has no name.
The show that has no name, yes.
Da-na-na-na-na-na.
It will come up on Sky something like
No name.
This show has no name, or it'll just come up as a blank space on the Sky planner. So just click on that.
Yes.
Yeah, we'll see you next time.
Don't miss show with no name.
I already said that.
Oh, okay.
We're just wasting their time now.
Okay, bye.
Bye.